So most of you will be very familiar with us and you will know that we are an industry-led network with a mission to radically improve the sustainability of the built environment. We represent the voice of the industry's current and future leaders who are striving for transformational change. We inspire, challenge and empower our members, helping them to identify and adopt the most sustainable and viable solutions. And hopefully there's a little bit of inspiration here today. Our membership has gone from strength to strength in the last year, COVID highlighting both the need and the possibility for rapid change. Covering the whole value chain, our membership is now approaching 600 members, and we continue to welcome new members each month. Importantly, in this decade of delivery, our focus has shifted from explaining why we need to act to how. And on this slide that shows society, business, government, all working together towards that 2030 date that we need to hit with certain targets to keep within the 1.5 degrees recommended by the IPCC. And it will take all of us, all those players, together to act in our varied roles to hit that goal. And this series of case studies forms a key part of that move to how, exploring how others have achieved results in different parts of the world that we can all learn from. So, welcome everybody to the second stop in our series. Inspired by the adventures of Phileas Fogg in French novelist Jules Verne's novel published in 1872, we're embarking on our own adventure around the world. Since 1872, CO2 emissions have risen from 288 parts per million to today's 418 parts per million, which sets the context for our modern circumnavigation. Nearly 150 years on, ours is an architectural, virtual and COVID-safe adventure that will explore some of the buildings and places responding to the challenges of global warming in the year leading up to what we hope will be another landmark COP summit in Glasgow in November. And for, I think, anyone, whether you're an adventurer or a beach-loving tourist, a stop in Costa Rica is incredibly exciting. So we started where the Paris Agreement was signed, and today we're moving on to where one of its chief architects, Cristiana Figueres, hails from. And she played a pivotal part in international negotiations, and Costa Rica itself is a leader in terms of the targets having been set by countries in the lead up to this year's COP. If you're not familiar with her work, the podcast Outrage and Optimism is brilliant, and there's a link in the handouts that will take you there. But first, our speakers for today, we've got, as I said, Nicholas here with us from Costa Rica live at 3 a.m. So he is here to answer questions and to join the discussion. So please do pop any questions in the chat box as we go, and jump in. We'll have dialogue as we go through the sessions as well. We also have Benjamin Sachs from Studio Sachs, who's presenting via video, a residential development within San Jose, and Bridget Solis, who is talking to us again by video about a leading office building in Costa Rica. Our agenda for today is very packed, so we'll go through quite quickly, but again, we'll have a chance for conversation throughout and hopefully lots of discussion at the end when we get to Q&A. So, how did we get from Paris to Costa Rica? Well, obviously we wanted to travel as low carbon as possible. So you can probably not see very well on this chart, but as a sailor, I had to map out our route across the Atlantic using the wind. So we're going down to the Canaries and then down further to Cape Verde before jumping across the Atlantic to Antigua, and then crossing the Mediterranean, the Caribbean Sea, and arriving at Costa Rica. Now, the trade-off here is that it has taken us 41 days to travel across this journey at 6 knots, which is average sailing cruising speed. So low carbon it is, speedy it is not. But here we are. And it's important that we meet our traveling companions because we've been in a very confined space for 41 days. So like Greta, we didn't travel quite as fast as her, but you will have been gifted with a crew. So we're just going to jump into a breakout room and introduce yourself to a fellow traveling companion. We're just going to have a quick minute to say hello, who you are and where you're from. Okay, so now hopefully you've met an interesting traveling companion, and we're going to now listen to Nicholas present from Costa Rica and give us an introduction to the context that they're working in there at the moment.
Good morning and welcome to Costa Rica, your next stop on UKGBC's journey around the world in 80 case studies. My name is Nicolás Ramírez. I am the CEO of the Green Building Council of Costa Rica, and on behalf of our board of directors, our staff, and all of our members, we want to thank you for joining us for this very engaging session. Believe it or not, I'm in downtown San Jose, Costa Rica. I would love to tell you that all of downtown is this beautiful, lush, and green, but unfortunately it's not. We still have plenty of work to do here. Costa Rica, for those of you who have visited us before, is not world-renowned for its natural beauty in its capital. It's for our beaches and rainforests. In Costa Rica, our green building market is steadily growing. Costa Rica has the largest amount of accredited professionals and certified projects in all of Central America and the Caribbean region. As far as project certification goes, we have noticed a steady growth both in LEED and EDGE project certification. Over the past 5 years, LEED project certification has grown at an average of 25% per year, and EDGE certification has grown at an average of 40% per year, both very promising numbers. It is worthwhile to note that of all projects certified in Costa Rica, both in EDGE and LEED, the vast majority is in commercial or office space certifications, making up almost 65% of total certifications. Through many years of lobbying and coordinating efforts between both the public and private sector, we are finally beginning to see the first fruits of our labors. Innovative initiatives like this project you see here, called the ODM building, are examples of public and private collaboration to achieve outstanding project outcomes. This project, which you will see later in our showcase of national projects, is the result of an excellent collaboration for both public and private funding, administration, and project undertaking. In the last 3 years, the national government has made very serious commitments in terms of sustainable development and climate change mitigation. 3 major policies have been put in place. First of all, the National Decarbonization Plan. Secondly, the D50 directive for the Ministry of Environment and Energy. And thirdly, the updating of the nationally determined commitments. In the following slides, you will see a bit more detailed information regarding these 3 initiatives. The National Decarbonization Plan is a very ambitious goal set by the government, which covers several axes of action and has set forth goals for both 2030 and 2050. Of the axis of action in which the GBCCR contributes most, and we're lobbying most and working mostly in regards of initiatives with our allies, are the axis of energy and the axis of construction and infrastructure. As you can see in these slides, there are several different items addressed and several different goals which involve stakeholders from many different sectors: public, private, local government, national government, and several others in between. So the GBCCR plays a very important role in this, in bringing these people together and helping to engage different stakeholders which normally are not engaged. For those of you who work within the construction value chain, you know that there are different roles that are played in different phases of construction and projects, and often several of these participants or actors play very low-key roles or are involved in project development far too late in the process. So what GBCCR is trying to do in collaboration with municipalities and with different government agencies is bringing to the table more or less an integrated design process, let's say, where these actors are being involved. Their needs and concerns are being addressed and taken into account far early in the process of legislation and policy making. Costa Rica is the first country in the region to have a national decarbonization plan, and it is a very ambitious goal for the country. This is not new for Costa Rica. Some of you may know that Costa Rica has been very well renowned globally for initiatives that it has taken decades ago in regards of reforestation and protecting our national parks and reserves. One of the main objectives the current government has, and working together with municipalities in which the GBCCR participates quite actively, is trying to analyze which policies from these former successes in terms of reforestation and national conservancy can be carried over into the urban landscape, where we can use this same legislation and these same initiatives to try and protect and optimize our urban green spaces, trying to provide much healthier and accessible green spaces within our cities. Another very important piece of national legislation is the D50 directive, which was published by the the Ministry of Energy and Environment. This is a very interesting preliminary legislation in terms that it applies only to the public sector, both central and local and independent government bodies. That includes municipalities and power companies and so on and so forth. What the D50 describes is the implementation of sustainable building practices, both in design, operation, remodeling, and construction of new projects. This is something that has been in effect for almost 2 years and is seen as a preliminary first step towards building consciousness and lobbying towards the integration of these practices in standard government procedure. What is expected by most of us in the sector is that this will lead into a non-voluntary but obligatory legislation in the years to come. The third example of government commitment, which I would like to share with you, are the nationally determined commitments, the NDCs, which Costa Rica very recently updated. They had published their original NDCs in 2016, and at the end of last year, this update was published. The GBCCR participated with different work groups as a part of the development of these new commitments to be published, and these are now actually in effect. Within the NDCs, we see once again different sectors which are addressed. The GBCCR works actively within once again, the energy sector and what is the infrastructure and construction sector, working with different stakeholders in these areas, trying to make sure that they are all aware of the NDCs, what these commitments are, and how they can align their organizations, strategies, and initiatives to try and collaborate towards this common goal we all have. More recently, just last May, GBCCR was invited to be one of the only 2 non-government parties involved in formulating the first national sustainable construction legislation. This legislation will be regarding sustainable construction in low-income housing. This first national legislation is very important for our market transformation, as it represents a collaboration between both public and private sectors towards market transformation that we are all so desperately in need of. Although we have a long way to go, we have gained good traction, and both our influence and support continue to grow. The green building movement in Costa Rica is strong, and our role in bridging the gap between public and private sectors will continue to unite efforts in order to multiply achievements towards a built environment that is increasingly focused on the well-being of this and future generations. I am proud to introduce 2 close friends of GBCCR, both passionate leaders of our green building movement. First, we will see a presentation from Benjamin Garcia, an architect from Studio Sax, who will be showcasing one of his projects for you. And secondly, you will see a presentation from Bridget Solis from Circuito Johnson Controls, who will also be showcasing another one of our projects. I hope you enjoyed the presentations. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. Very, very jealous of what you have in your city centre compared to the terraced brick houses that I have out my window. Sounds like you've got a massive amount of change coming through the industry at the moment with those legislations coming in and working towards implementing these targets that have been set? Is it that challenge of getting everyone coming together? How is that going for you?
Thanks, Nadine. It's a very interesting times, let's say. Costa Rica has with those three examples of legislation that I described, there is obviously a lot of pressure on the government to come through with what they've committed to. But at the same time, there's also, at least in the building movement, there is usually a bit of, I'd say it's more progressive than other sectors. So there is a lot of awareness and there is a lot of actual pressure from influential actors in the private sector, in development and construction, that are actually pushing for this kind of change. Also, Costa Rica has historically had a fairly, let's say, keen awareness of what's going on and what needs to be done in terms of environmental solutions and things like that. So I think society in general, or the industry in general, is pretty accustomed to knowing that we're a bit ahead of the curve, at least in our ambitions. I don't think Costa Ricans aren't in general, let's say, intimidated by, let's say, overwhelming goals or things like that. They've abolished the army when everyone around them was at civil war. They've done several other things. So they're used to being, let's say, like a bit different or a bit ahead of the curve in, at least, like I say, in ambition and things they want to do. But obviously there is a lot of doubt and even in some cases, let's say, maybe worry about how we're going to get this done, these huge big goals. And I think in general terms, one of the things we do from the GBCCR is try and bring down to our local context all these big global goals. You know, people see the what do they call it in English, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, and all these big 2030 and 2050, and they're like, how are we going to affect these huge things globally with our such small markets and, you know, with our relatively small, let's say, impact or footprint? So bringing those things down to a more where they can touch and feel and see what these things actually mean on the ground for us, and reminding them that all the climate change that they see being forecasted was also produced by many small local actions that come together for this big global effect. So obviously the solution should be pretty much the same. Lots of small local initiatives and efforts coming together for one big global effect. So that's basically, you know, that's pretty much our day-to-day, Nadine, bringing that down and trying to keep people motivated and getting people together. Lots of, for us, it's the way of doing business here still is pretty much not so articulated between public and private sector. So we try to bring those people together and make sure that people aren't working in silos, but actual efforts are being brought together towards these NDCs or these national decarbonization plans, and trying to get everyone kind of, you know, try to multiply the product or the fruits of their labors, let's say.
Absolutely. And it seems like that is it's definitely shared here in the UK, that need for everyone to come together. And again, that moving down to, you know, but what does it mean in terms of my action that I take, and how does that fit into the, you know, the jigsaw puzzle that you've described there. But again, that national attitude that just because it's a big goal doesn't mean we can't do it. Feels like it's brilliant to have some case studies in your back pocket of, you know, radical thinking and success with that radical thinking over a long period of time. So hopefully we can learn something from that, because up on the screen now we've got, you know, the tourist's view. So obviously what we see from the outside is different to what you see and experience living within Costa Rica. But these themes of, you know, biodiversity and the tremendous success you've had in the country, especially compared to neighbouring countries which have seen the opposite happening over the same, you know, 50-year time period. You know, this growth in biodiversity and land attributed to it, which is now trickling into, it feels like from the case studies that we've looked at that are in the handouts, that this is filtering into a philosophy of design in many cases, you know, trying to bring that into the city centre. Also, you know, we know about the army abolition, which has freed up resources to put to other public services like education and health, but also, you know, the tremendous success in renewable energy, grid energy, which coming from New Zealand, I know, excuse me, we were very lucky there to have, again, a high degree of renewable energy, largely hydro. And that means that, you know, the challenge of decarbonising a grid that we have here in the UK is less. But obviously these new world problems around infrastructure, car-based design, and, you know, the new buildings that we have faced by you in Costa Rica, to an extent here in the UK as well, for new towns and suburbs that were developed post-car. But fascinating, and we're going to look at some of these case studies shortly, but right now we're going to hear from Benjamin with the Gardenia building, which is a new residential tower which incorporates this philosophy of bringing nature in. So we're going to watch again another short video here and hear about the process that he went through as an architect and developer to influence and show a leadership position, I think it would be fair to say, with this new building.
Hi everyone, my name is Benjamin Garcia Sachs. I'm director of Studio Sachs in Costa Rica, an architecture firm mostly interested in the relationship between the built environment and the natural world. We are here constantly asking the question of the impact that we have on the designs that we produce in places on the beach, in places on the mountains. But in reality, one of the biggest questions that we've asked recently is how can we impact positively the growth of our city, San Jose? And we began by thinking about a project, about this idea that how the urbanity of the world is expanding, and that we should also create an example of sustainable design that is not only in pristine, beautiful locations of Costa Rica, which is our main focus, but actually that maybe we could also do it in a city like San Jose, and which has all the problems of all major cities, overpopulation and waste management and all of that. So the idea of developing a project in the city further was accentuated with this idea of creating my own home with friends. We wanted to live close to everything. We wanted to walk to everything. This idea that we wanted a compact city where we could cycle everywhere, that doesn't exist in Costa Rica. So we wanted to begin to create that. We also have been commissioned in the past or were contacted to design vertical apartment buildings. I realized quickly every time I was contacted to design one of these buildings that the restrictions that was imposed by the developer were very, I would say, very difficult to come through and to change in the status quo. For example, one of the main things was nobody would buy a terrace or a balcony. That's area that can't be sold. There's a certain amount of units to be had in an apartment building. If not, it just doesn't work. There can't be any vegetation or any greenery on buildings, because that means that there is no maintenance, or there's a maintenance issue, and nobody wants to take care of plants, and thus no buildings have plants because it's a hassle. And materials have to be as cheap as possible so that it could be built as quick as possible to be able to sell as expensive as possible. So these are the powers of most developers that look at residential buildings around the world. This is not a problem of Central America or even of Costa Rica. So the problem that, the issue that we wanted to tackle was more in the genesis of the project. the idea of the project or the development of the project. How can we create economic strategy, a development strategy that would allow us to create the architecture that we want for the cities that we want? So we delved deep into the economics of the project. We managed to realize that buying a piece of land in the heart of the city for a certain amount of money and creating a certain type of apartment with huge terraces and loads of greenery was actually something that many people desired, especially those that lived in homes with small backyards that were now coming to the city to live a more simple life, less full of maintenance and all of those stuff, and less commuting. Now they could live in the city with the same things they had before, but without losing the quality of life. So my main selling point as an architect developer in this case was we're going to have huge terraces and we're going to have big balconies and you're going to be able to enjoy and plant all around your apartment, and you're going to have high ceilings and you're going to have all this quality of life, cross ventilation, natural light, all the things that we wish we could design on a project. So we named the project Gardenia. Gardenia is a flower, it's a plant. We see a lot of developments being named as something else or even as another place. We see developments being named as places in the States or in Europe, but we didn't want to import anything. We wanted to create an authentic design. So Gardenia was literally conceived as a vertical garden, a vertical apartment building with gardens that flow out from the balconies. I would call them terraces that have enormous windows that open up completely to living areas, that allow for cross ventilation all throughout, with 3-bedroom apartments mostly used by families or by people that wanted to leave homes and wanted larger homes and wanted to simple their lives after their kids had left. So the question was there a market for this? Does this exist? And the other question was, is the price point accessible? And we delved deep into trying to make it competitive in the market, very competitive, so that people will take it off our hands. Well, it was my surprise that even just with friends and with known people and even family, the apartment building was sold in less than a month. So there was a huge need for this type of apartment that nobody believed it existed. And it allowed us as architects to create the beautiful architecture that we expected. So one of the things I learned by working abroad, I worked for about 10 years in different parts of the world from London, working on diverse projects, was that at the end of the day, it is the setup of a project and it is the environment around the project. Environment meaning legal environment, economic environment, and the ethos of the project that actually makes the project. I could be a good architect, but if everything else is not in place, then probably my efforts will be futile. So I realized that taking control of the economics of a project, of the development of a project, changing the status quo of what is supposedly what people want and actually creating what people really want, made a product that is actually very scarce and very valuable. Gardenia has also common areas that, such as a gym and typical areas for community to come together, for the community in the building. Because these are friends and family, we managed to design the building to what we wanted. So in a way, it's a sort of co-op. I would say a sort of an invented co-op, where we put together, even though legally this doesn't exist in Costa Rica, we sort of put together this way of developing a project so that we could use the best materials possible that will last as long as possible, that we created the type of building and the lifestyle that we wanted in the city of San Jose, where we could walk to the coffee shops, etc., etc., etc. Another interesting lesson that I had from this project was that most of the apartment buildings are developed looking at the numbers of parking spaces, especially in the city. So if you don't have 2 parking spaces, at least per apartment, nobody's going to buy that from you. So we didn't have that. We didn't have enough parking because the property was very small, because it was very central location, and it needed to work financially. So we only had one apartment per apartment, one parking per apartment. And I believe that was going to be a really, really hard thing to sell. And to my surprise, nobody cared about this. Everybody was fine, just having one car, maybe even having no car and using other types of public transport. And they understood that the vision for the city was a different one, of a compact city where everybody just walks to work, everybody lives close by. We are in front of a beautiful park, and also we can live the city in a democratic way, and we can all enjoy it between all the different people. And we don't have to be in a gated community outside of the city, having to commute 2 or 3 hours a day, and also being separated from other types of people and from other walks of life. So this idea that we can be in a place that is culturally diverse, that is centralized, that is of quality, not only quality of construction, but quality of space, huge terraces, greenery, bringing the tropical environment inside and living within the nature in the city of San Jose was one of the great accomplishments that we achieved with this building. And we hope that it's a beacon for future developers to understand that it is doable, it is possible to make this type of projects financially viable. But not only that, I believe that people looking for accommodation now are starting to look at this type of projects, and they are asking for better. People are asking for more quality, for better product now that this exists. So developers are now having to, forced by the new demand, to create a better quality of space, a better type of project. So I'm glad to be able to share this personal experience with you guys. It's a journey of becoming my own developer, to be able to control all the circumstances around the project, realizing that one small project can make a big change in your community. Hopefully this is an inspiration for everybody around the world. Thank you.
I'm really struck by, well, many things that he said there, but, you know, he seems to be really socially driven, you know, that this was really important, but that challenge of the compact city, one building he seems to have made quite an impact with this one building as a demonstration of a different way of doing things, both socially in terms of the built form, but pushing towards that compact city in a different way of living. Has it been quite a strong marker in the residential market there, Nicholas?
Yes, well, Benjamin he's already has a bit of a reputation in terms of being like a how would you say it? Vanguardista, let's say experimental, adventurous, bold in his design and his projects. So he has kind of set the tone in a few different things. He actually won some international awards a few years ago for a very small project that he actually built for his mother, but a very low impact beach house, let's say. And this was something very similar. He took something that was very common and very booming, let's say. That building that he's describing, Gardenia, is a residential tower in an area which was a very old neighborhood in very close to downtown San Jose. And there was a lot of towers, residential towers, going up pretty quickly, all very much the same. And they were causing some serious, let's say, social impact in the community. People complaining about being in the shadow of these buildings. Obviously, the public transport and transport issues were not really taken into account when giving permission for all this density. And so lots of different things were going on. And he actually managed to do, let's say, the same type of building, a residential tower, which is great, but he showed that it could be done in a different way. So the project is fairly recent in terms, so I don't think it's really had a chance for it to be, let's say, replicated yet. But I'll give you an example that within maybe to give you a bit of context, within 5 minutes walking distance of that tower, there are probably, I'd venture to say, about 10 to 15 other tower projects, and none of them have sold completely like his did. So I think that's a very important issue in terms of, from the developer standpoint, who always worry about how are they going to mitigate costs and this and that, and for them to see what an incredible let's say, selling tool, to put it in a certain way. What he was able to provide in that project was, that's not a cheap project. That's nowhere near low income housing or anything like that. It's a fairly it's not an exaggerated cost either. But what I mean to say is it's not it didn't sell quickly because of the price. It sold quickly because of all these other things he was able to offer, which weren't available at all in the market. So he showed that it can be done. It can be economically a good investment for the developer to build this kind of project and offer these kind of benefits to people. So I think in that sense, yeah, it was very groundbreaking, and I do expect to see those kind of concepts incorporated in other projects as we move forward. Definitely.
If anyone has any questions from the floor, please jump in. There are a few questions in the chat, which I don't know if you've had a chance to answer yet, Nicholas, but the one about...
I answered one, if it's okay. There's one that I would like to answer here in this space, if that's okay, in case there's some feedback.
Perfect.
Someone asked, I don't know word for word, asked about the three major challenges of implementing or convincing. Let's see, let me read it so I don't guess for you. Everything looks cool. What are the top 3 challenges you have in embedding green building practices in Costa Rica? So in regards to that question, I think that I wanted to address this one because I'm interested to know if it's the same for your context. Some of our major challenges, at least the 3 that pop to mind first, are one, first of all, is there's a huge misconception in terms of what additional or overhead costs might be for building green. People ask me all the time, so what percentage are we talking about for green construction? And obviously that's a very wide open question, you know. First of all, so that's one of the barriers, really bringing some truth and reality and let's say scope, exactly bringing that discussion to what are we talking about exactly? What are you saying when you think just to slap a few solar panels on the roof, or do you want to put an aerator on your faucet, or are you talking about full-grown holistic, you know, kind of integration or high tech? Or so it depends where you go with that conversation, but that is one barrier. People tend to just write it off because no, I don't have the money for sustainable. Don't waste my time. I barely have money to make this project at all. So that's one barrier. A second barrier is the whole return on investment discussion, which is kind of linked to that first one. You know, obviously a return on investment analysis can become much more, how would you say it? Sexy is not the word, attractive, sorry, can become much more attractive if that overhead or that additional cost is 3% instead of 20%, which is what people had in mind. So when I talk to a developer, if we're talking about a multi-million-dollar project, and we're discussing things that are in the realm of, you know, 2 to 5 years return on investment, that's like, Nick, don't waste my time. Obviously, let's do that. You know, when you get into the area of 7 to 10 years return on investment, they're like, okay, I think we can do that. And normally when we get above 12 to 13 years, they're like, I don't think we can do that. You know, you're going crazy on me. So basically the return on investment discussion is another barrier. And I think maybe to name a third one might be getting people to think more. And obviously this is all, I'm just giving economic examples right now, but also the idea of thinking mid to long term and not short term. Being a developing country with a developing market, obviously people usually tend to think we don't have money to do what they do. You know, let's get this done today. Let's build more low-income housing for this. I'd rather build 3 more low-income houses for this government project of 500 than, you know, make them more efficient, more resilient, and have them, you know, withstand floods, for a 50 or 80 years flood. So that kind of thing, that kind of long-term thinking is a bit more harder to convince. And to not extend myself too long, that also ties very much into what it means to have a clean energy grid. We have a very clean energy grid by some standards, in terms of it being over 90, I think 97% hydro, and we have solar and wind power quickly taking on stronger percentages of that. So it's a fairly clean grid in that sense, but the problem is a fairly clean grid is in a very climate vulnerable grid. Obviously, when the rain doesn't do what it's supposed to do according to our charts, you know, it plays with us. Wind, solar exposition, all those things that you know, when the climate plays around and doesn't behave, it makes it much harder to estimate what kind of infrastructure we need and to provide the offer of energy we need for our growing market. So we are much more vulnerable in that sense to those changes. So thinking long term in terms of resilience for our clean grid is another challenge, I would say.
Brilliant. Yeah, we have the same issue here in terms of cost and that perception of cost as a barrier. And we have done some work. Our Advancing Net Zero team has done some work on costing both an office and a residential development. So, you know, those pieces of evidence that you've now got this one that you can point to and say, you know, well, this was the cost difference and this was the sales time difference. Hopefully these pieces of evidence that we keep gathering in our own markets and across the globe will help to shift that discussion. But yes, I would say we share all of those challenges here. So in your handouts, I don't know if you will have had a chance to have a look, but you can always go back to them. But there are a few buildings here that we've looked at that really do seem to further this focus on nature. As we saw from Nicholas' talk at the beginning, in the jungle surrounding the ODM building, you know, this parkland setting and the importance of connecting the building itself to nature. And I think there's 25 kilometers worth of paths available from this building to the north and to the south across the city, as well as being LEED Gold. You know, this building really does seem to bring that to life. The next one, the middle one there in the picture, the Casa Carazo, looks really exciting to me. Again, you know, they've managed to reduce embodied energy in materials by 71%, which is phenomenal. But also looking at using vegetation to fix carbon, and also, you know, biophilic design, which I know, Anna, you'll love, you know, bringing the plants inside the building for health and well-being is always, you know, ticking off a number of, you know, those SDGs, I guess, you know, the health and well-being, the environment, and also the climate with that one kind of intervention. And as Benjamin touched on, you know, this third one on the top there, the Surf Simply, is what we think of, you know, the kind of eco-resort in the resort-based country. Tourism is a really important industry for you there. And again, you know, it seems to articulate all the things that we think about in terms of positioning itself very carefully within the environment, both in terms of, you know, cutting down as few trees as possible, but also maintaining, I really liked howler monkey trails. Here I've looked at a building in the Netherlands that looked at, you know, bat flight paths and designed around that. But I mean, these things would never have been thought about and considered as part of fundamental design even 10 years ago, I don't think. So brilliant to see this coming through, and also, you know, that having to put in infrastructure for capturing water and recycling and using that and sharing that benefit to the community, not just for this this resort in this isolated location, but addressing a community need with what they were building as well. And finally, the convention centre, which again, you know, this is kind of a flagship and an advertisement for Costa Rica, which captures rainwater for 100% of toilet use and irrigation, which is really impressive. And as well as louvers for ventilation and trees for shading. I really liked that the solar tubes were incorporated throughout the convention centre, meaning that there's no artificial lighting required during the day, which is, you know, just unheard of for most convention centres or buildings of this shape and form. So When you get a chance to have a look through the case studies further, do dig through them and look for these kind of interventions that you know we might be aware exist, but if they've been used in a different way or frankly are new to you as well. But I think we'll move on and have a look at Bridget's example, which is a more very certification focused, which as Nicholas said at the beginning, you know, this increase in certification is a really encouraging sign, but there are challenges associated with it, as we will hear from Brigitte. And play, brilliant.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Brigitte Solis. I work in Johnson Controls here in Costa Rica at the Sustainability Department. Today, I come to tell you about a case study, which is our most recent LEED Gold certified project under the rating system Building Design and Construction Core and Shell, which is Torre Universal. Well, it has 20 floors. The first 8 are parking lots. Also, on the main access, we have a little bit of retail. First of all, I would like us to place ourselves in the context when this project started in 2017. At that time, we have the new version from LEED version 4 arrived with a lot of changes. For example, they took a big step. For example, categories such as material and resources, energy and atmosphere, and also indoor air quality. So when Torre Universal started, the owner was really focused to achieve LEED. It was a huge challenge because here in Central America and Costa Rica, there was so much uncertainty what is going to happen. A lot of mandatory provisions were new in this version. A lot of requirements for materials change. And funny story, at the beginning, for Torre Universal, we set the bar to achieve or pursuing LEED Silver. But lucky for us, around January 2019, LEED launched LEED 4.1. That was a great news because they made a little bit of changes regarding, for example, materials like low emitting, the EPDs, the requirement for buildings as core and shell. And then we restructure the credits that we are pursuing, and then we focus on achieve LEED Gold. So it was a great news when we understand that we can use like an hybrid project. So at this moment, we choose which credits were the best option to achieve with LEED 4.1. For example, the FTDs, and the material ingredients also. For example, low emitting was another goal to make this kind of iterate. So with Torre Universal, we changed the approach. With LEED version 4, you have to be creative and focus. What is your target? What do you want to do? So that's the moment when we realized, okay, we can do it. Before we were thinking about, for example, start doing things on the construction phase that I will tell you a little bit more later. But I think it's really important to, at the beginning, set a clear goal, explaining these strategies to all the stakeholders, also the commitment from the owner to understand what is implying to get involved in the process for a LEED certification. And also for us here in Costa Rica was really excited to have this project because it's a big one. Also, if you can see the picture behind the urban context here in Costa Rica, we are getting started with this kind of big buildings. Also, one of the main tenants here in Torre Universal is Microsoft. So it was like an iconic project for downtown in San Jose, and a lot of eyes were looking what we are doing. Another important things, for example, that we analyzed on the design process was how to achieve more energy efficiency. For example, we create a lot of energy modeling at the beginning boxes to analyze materials, the quality of the glass, for example. I don't know. I think we were analyzed around 6 or 7 type of glasses, analyzing how was the solar heat coefficient affect the energy modeling and what else we can do. Something else that we introduced on the process in the design phase was to create reuse rainwater. Here in Costa Rica, we are in a tropical country. Here rain a lot around all the year. So we capture that water and reuse it. So that's another strategy important that we implement in this project. Also, this project is located in a really dense part of San Jose. So part of the strategies was to create some open spaces. We have the no-line lot that all the building is in the boundary of the site. So we have this kind of strategies to create open space inside the main building. For example, we have here in this picture, you can see the terrace that we created on the 14th floor. So to achieve, for example, the open space credit, and also to create biophilia for the users, because it's really important to have this kind of connections and spaces to breathe and make a pause and then continue working. At the construction phase, we have a lot of goals that we are really proud of. For example, in the process for the construction waste management plan, at the beginning, we asked for 75%. And I remember when we start the project, the people, the contractor asked how we can achieve it. Well, we received the great news that we achieved 82%, and we made it. So I encourage everyone to try and to focus, and also to include all the stakeholders to understand the importance. The construction management is a prerequisite and also is a grade. So don't focus only on the prerequisite. Focus to achieve more and more, and you are going to be surprised at the end of the process. Another important achievement was that we reuse rainwater for toilets on the first 8 floors from the building. With this strategy, we achieved more than 50% of water use reduction. So with LEED version 4, we have to be creative in how to achieve more and more points to reach the goal that we set at the beginning of the project. So rainwater divert more than we expected from landfill. Another was on the design phase, we were really focused to understand how to achieve more efficiency regarding energy. We start with early energy modeling, boxes, material selection. Well, this is the end of the process. This year, in March, we received the great news that Torre Universal achieved LEED Gold certification. That was really great news for all the team and all the people involved in the whole process. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that you enjoy a little bit this short story about the certification process, and have a great day. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Really interesting. I found that really interesting for a number of reasons, but the main one, you know, there's a perception that certification can drive out creativity or innovation, but she made the point really clearly that it drove a need to be creative, to find ways to achieve these points, which is really impressive, as was the attention to detail with, you know, the types of glazing. There seemed to be no standard answers that she sought there, which again was really impressive. And as you've touched on, you know, those big goals, you know, setting these big goals that people thought were unachievable, and you know, turns out that actually they are more than achievable once everyone's pointing in the same direction. I'm just going to point to the other projects in our case studies before we move to questions and answers and discussion. And the first one in the top corner there, I'm not even going to try and say it because my Spanish is non-existent, but a retrofit of 5 buildings aged between 12 and 20 years old to improve their energy efficiency. And as well as avoiding rebuild with all the embodied energy that entails, a real focus in this project on upgrading energy systems and sub-metering, to look at behaviours and to drive change within the occupants, as well as accommodating their comfort needs. And this project achieved LEED Gold for maintenance and operations, which is brilliant. But again, you know, this issue of retrofit, particularly in these newer buildings. I mean, we have in Europe, and I'm sure you do in Costa Rica as well, the heritage buildings, which are quite an issue, but were built to last, whereas the buildings of the last 50 years are coming up on their obsolescence, you know, design timeframes. So this is going to be an increasing challenge for all of us. The Courts of Justice building in the middle there, in a more distant location from the capital. And again, even this choice of putting it there, or this development of this building there, allows job opportunities and, you know, an economic driver that perhaps didn't exist before. But they've made the most of the hot and dry location by putting 120 PV panels on their roof to generate electricity, and also minimising the disadvantages of this climate with natural ventilation, the use of an internal courtyard to do away with the need for air conditioning, which is very impressive, as well as rainwater harvesting and black water recycling, which is again another step beyond what most projects would attempt to achieve. And on the top right there is a social housing development, and there were, I think, 120 units in this development, 2 of which were used as a pilot for higher quality social housing, which I think we've touched on a little bit in the conversation before, that a little bit more attention to the design and what goes in at this build stage will have a far greater impact in terms of lower utility costs and therefore the quality of life and comfort of the people that are moving into these buildings. So great to see some pilots happening there in that sector as well. And finally, down the bottom, something that looks very familiar to me as a New World project. I could see this in Brisbane or in Auckland as easily as I could see it in Costa Rica. But this one's a LEED Platinum building, which maxed out on energy and water credits. So by using orientation and photovoltaics, it generates 103% of its energy annually, which is, again, very impressive. The natural cross ventilation and lighting, the elevation to catch the breeze, the use of native species of plants, and really thinking hard about irrigation techniques, driving down water consumption by 78%. So we've seen an array of projects across the handouts and from the speakers that really are pushing boundaries that we know need to be pushed if we're to meet the goals in terms of climate and environment that we want to reach. So I've seen that there's another couple of questions in the chat, and I'd like to really open the floor to everyone to jump in with questions now. I know there's one there about reforestation and the, Anna, do you want to jump in with your question?
Sure, thank you. I was just interested in the reforestation that's happened over the last number of years, and what the question really was whether there was any resistance to that reforestation, and also how it might have changed people's perception of their environment.
Sure, great, thank you, Anna. It's a very interesting question, and it has a lot of collateral effects. So I would like to address that. First of all, yes, initially there was a lot of resistance, even violent retaliation on some of the, let's say, the activists at the beginning that were pushing this small country commercial there. One of the main well, how would you say it, promoters of that movement, of that legislation, was Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, who is now the chair of the GEF. He was the country's national environment minister on 2 different occasions in different governments. And he worked with national parks for a few decades. And he has just recently, at the beginning of last year, I think, took over the CEO position at the GEF. So yeah, he really laid the groundwork for a lot of very innovative legislation, and there was a lot of resistance at the beginning. And when I say beginning, I'm probably 10 or 15 years of the beginning, not a few months. But because obviously this doesn't, you know, that before and after images that I showed you before, which I apologize for the horrible quality. I don't know why we don't have anything better. But at least you get an idea of how much green has changed. That obviously takes quite a while to happen. There was a lot of retaliation, resistance at the beginning, obviously from private sector, from once again, the same things we were talking about earlier, people who had a bit of difficulty seeing the economic benefits of more mid and long-term planning and stuff like that. And obviously there was no other, there was no benchmark. We couldn't say, hey, look what Honduras is doing with their ecotourism, you know, or anyone else. The examples we at least knew at times, successful tourism models weren't the kind of models we wanted to follow. We didn't want to be a Cancun or Acapulco, nothing against Cancun or Acapulco, or Hawaii. That's just not us. So it was hard to say what are they going to be the benefits of this, you know? So that process advanced. There was, I do remember, I think it was somewhere near 2000. There was a very groundbreaking some groundbreaking news that really shifted, I think, some of those paradigms, which is for the first time ever, I think it was somewhere near 2000, I can't remember the date, tourism brought in more money economically than coffee exportation. So that was a bit of like an awakening, which is coffee exportation. This had been a coffee exporting country for decades, for generations. And obviously that was always seen as like the mainstay. Coffee, then banana exportation came in, but other kinds of basic, let's say, agriculture exportations were always like the main thing. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, tourism came and generated a greater percentage of our capital that year, and it has been maintained that way for since. So this was really something where this was the big "I told you so" of a lot of people, you know, and they started to, and this kind of trickled over into other areas, which is why I think it's interesting. What happened in reforestation thought was going to, maybe many people thought was going to bankrupt us. We're giving up this huge, valuable resource in terms of bringing money in. All of a sudden, it ended up we're making more money actually not touching it, you know, and putting in programs. We're actually paying people to fix carbon and keep those forests in there. And these have these different programs that have been moving along slowly but surely. So all of a sudden, that obviously changes the shift in a lot of things. Oh, so there's actually money in conservation, you know, and this can, you know, bring different benefits we hadn't even thought of. So yeah, that is, I think, one of the major success stories, but also one of the things that has helped a lot in terms of lobbying and change the way people think and perceive this. And I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in this video, or not, but that's what they're trying to do now with our urban legislation is see what actually worked or what were the key factors or the catalysts in legislation for reforestation and how we can translate that into our urban legislation for municipalities and different campaigns that are now we're trying to implement to, to try and kind of take back our downtown and get more green areas and bring, I don't know if it's happened to you guys, but also in urban sprawl, you get all these people leaving the capital, you know, and then we're trying to get them back now to all these empty lots and reuse these spaces and make it more livable and so on. So that's really being analyzed to see how we can translate those successes into what we want to do now in terms of downtown and the more urban scapes, let's say.
Do you feel, Nicholas, that this I know for us, we find that we are concentrated very much on our big players, like the blue chip companies are doing this kind of work naturally. Is it still a niche thing, or do you find that is trickling down, like, you know, Anna said, that effect of, I guess, valuing the environment in a different way is pushing back up as well? Because we find that, you know, we have an increasing number at that top level who think that sustainability is essential, but it still is largely that top level. You know. How do you think that sits in Costa Rica at the moment?
Well, we do definitely have that top level. You do have that upper echelon of organizations. But there are changes. There are changes. For I'll give a few subtle changes that I've noticed recently. First of all, within that group, maybe I'll say, let's say 7 to 10 years ago, that group would have all been international companies. Okay, not Costa Rican original companies. Now you do see Costa Rican companies within that echelon of industry leaders, and even it doesn't even have to be in terms of leaders, of even people that really don't care that much about sustainability realize that they can make money, you know, being more sustainable, which make my work a lot easier in some cases. Because I can't brainwash everybody. No, I can't convince everybody, but at least the ones that I can convince, if they come along on their other terms, it's great, you know. So that is one major change. And yes, there are much more recently, Nadine, maybe within the last, let's say 3 to 4 years, you see a lot more of startups and entrepreneurial initiatives that are very sustainable. And I'm talking like, you know, anything from like a bakery to like, let's say, organic shampoos and soap companies, very like local startup companies. They're really even much far ahead of some of these other much larger corporations, stuff like that. So that mix has more recently started to come alive. And also what I tried to show within the selection of the projects is it has become much more diverse. The first, let's say, lead projects in Costa Rica, maybe, I don't know, probably about eight or 9 years ago, were like, let's say, like a Johnson Controls or a Schneider Electric or Bank of America or something like that. Now you see all kinds of companies looking for this in different sectors as well. We now have this is the low-income housing is much more recent. It's been really hard to get the government in terms of low-income housing to come on board with sustainable solutions and more than sustainable, really resilient solutions. We've had a few very impactful tragedies here with, you know, flooding and stuff like that, where the most vulnerable people obviously are the most affected, and getting them to realize that this is not a luxury or a fad, has been hard. It's nice to see some projects coming along, and that legislation that I mentioned is being developed. So that's a big step forward in terms of seeing where this starts to play out in different areas and different sectors. But yeah, definitely I would say, I come from a building background. I was a contractor, a general contractor. I started my own company for 15 years. And unfortunately, the construction companies, we're always the last ones on board here. So here in our sector, I'd say that's something our GPC has. I think now yesterday, I think we had our 5th construction company become a member, and I couldn't go out because I'm in quarantine, but I want to go and buy champagne, because for us to have 5 construction companies as a member is magnificent. So yeah, they're slowly coming along, but we really need them on board. But yeah, I guess the answer is yes, there is change, not as fast as I'd like, but yeah, we are seeing diversity and impact in that sense.
Brilliant. There is a question about the impact of COVID-19 on tourism, and I guess kind of related to that, you know, do you think tourism has been part of the driver, you know, for these entrepreneurial startups that, you know, people coming in from other countries and demanding a different thing, or, you know, the international companies, you know, the likes of Microsoft in Brigitte's example, you know, they are now mandating, you know, they've got exceedingly high carbon sink targets. They want to go back and offset everything they've ever produced, which is, I guess, driving down their supply chain. So double prong on that question. Do you think that's some of the driver? And, you know, what has the impact of COVID-19 been on the environment and climate in Costa Rica?
Okay. I'm not sure if I understood the first part of the question right. I'll give you the answer that I think it is, but you tell me if I'm off base. I'm not sure if you're asking about the impact in terms of, did we see, like you saw in other countries where all of a sudden there were like deer walking down the street, or like bears in downtown Canada and in Toronto and stuff like that? That not so much, because in general terms, obviously tourism here is huge for us, but the kind of tourism we do isn't really that, isn't in general terms. Obviously there are exemptions, but in general terms, it's not that high impact. So for example, what we have seen, I wouldn't say so much in terms of tourism, in terms of the wildlife. Obviously tourism was hugely impacted, and of the companies that have actually gone bankrupt and gone under, tourism and restaurants have been the biggest. And obviously for us, tourism being as important as it is nationally is a huge issue. But even more than that, the problem of the impact of COVID in terms of tourism is, tourism was, let's say, the major employer in many remote communities. Like I said, since our tourism is not that kind of big resort kind of thing, it's usually more sustainable rural tourism, and lots of tourism in not so populated places, right? So usually where that does happen, the impact was huge on those communities. Very, 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 very devastating for many of them. And there have been many programs put in place by the government, and lots of effort on behalf of people involved, business owners involved in the tourism sector, doing all kinds of programs to try and help, you know, maintain their employees and do this and that. So there has been a huge, I'd say, broad effort from different stakeholders in that sense. But yeah, they had the actual communities and the people have been very impacted greatly. It is picking up. Thankfully, a few studies have come out from different organizations stating that of the safest places to travel back to once things open up, Costa Rica is at the top of the list, because they were very quick to implement protocols. Another commercial for Costa Rica, here I go. They've been at the top of several of those international lists that get published. So that has helped. I know it's picking up, obviously nowhere near where it used to be. But yeah, it is picking up, and the government has worked very closely with that sector to get all the protocols and make it as easy as possible for people to come back, you know, in terms of the restrictions they have on people to enter the country and stuff like that. So yeah, it is open again. You're welcome to come. And it's not as healthy as it once was, but we expect it to be there soon, hopefully. I don't know if that answered the question.
Just last question, I can chat, who notes that Costa Rica has topped the Happy Planet Index many times, and asking, why do you think this is? Is health and well-being a priority for the built environment as well?
That's a great question. Yeah, we often have different communities popping up on these international indexes and things like that, and it's definitely true. Well, I'll make a small announcement. I was born in Chile, in South America, and I was raised in Toronto, Canada. I've lived here now for 25 years. I'm married to a Costa Rican, so I have a bit of that outside vision from different, let's say, cultures. But what I can definitely say is different about Costa Ricans in that sense is there is in general terms, there is that, you may have heard their national saying here, the thing they say the most is called pura vida. Pura vida is like cool or great, or, I agree, or it's used for several different things. But pura vida means pure life. And in general, it represents, let's say, like an attitude or a demeanor of how they approach several things. Once again, obviously, this is very generalistic and very average. There are all kinds of cases, but what I mean is, in general terms, Costa Ricans do have an appreciation for quality of life, in good terms and in bad senses, also in extremes. But they do have a general appreciation of quality of life, and they have come to learn, I think, like I said at the very beginning, to not be restricted by what they're supposed to do in terms of their different contexts. So I think that helps to provide these kind of conditions. Obviously, like I said, there are exceptions. Please do not in any way think that we don't deal with poverty and suicide and all kinds of other horrible things. But in general terms, yeah, there are areas like that here, and there are also initiatives that promote this. So yeah, it's I can't tell you exactly why that is, but definitely there are different conditions that stand out. And when you come in as an outsider, you definitely see things that are a little bit different. And I guess this is the combination of those different factors.
That's brilliant. Yeah, great question. Thank you. And just before we move on and close, I want to thank you so much, Nicholas, for giving your time at this ridiculous time of day, not even day yet, with us here today. And please pass on our thanks both to Benjamin and Brigitte for videoing their presentations and sharing them with us, and also those who pulled together content for the handouts that we hope to share quite widely after this event as well. It's been really insightful listening to you, and thank you so much for joining us today. Just to close, I'm just going to run through, we've got a couple of other events coming up. We've got quite a focus on biodiversity, nature and biodiversity at the moment. So for those of you who have been interested by what's been happening in Costa Rica, there's plenty more to keep you going. So go to our webpage, the events webpage, to have a look there. And just on the next slide, you'll note that Change Accelerator is one of our leadership programs, and that is taking registrations now as well for a start in the autumn. So make sure that you get that out to people within your organisation as well. And finally, just to welcome you back to the next one, hopefully. In October, we'll be visiting China, which will be critical to the success of COP in November. So join us again in October, where we'll do the same thing and have a look at some of the things going on there. And we do have a link to get feedback that we'd love it if you would fill in, just letting us know how you found the session, and any hints for future sessions, if it's too long or too short, or if there's another way that you think would be good to engage, then please do let us know. We're very aware that people are a little bit over this format now. We would like to see each other face to face. Obviously quite difficult as we go around the world, but we'd love to hear your feedback. So thank you all for coming today. And thanks again to Nicholas, and hopefully see you all again in October.